Fifine has made some nice options in the market of budget-friendly microphones for content creation, gaming, streaming, and podcasting. Today we're looking at a new option that offers both XLR and USB connectivity, the Tank3 from the AmpliTank line. At a price of $89, is it better than the competition? Before we dive in, I want to mention that Fifine sent me the Tank3 for the purpose of reviewing it. I was not paid to make this video, and Fifine has no input on my review. I do have an Amazon affiliate link in the description for you in case you're interested in picking up the Tank3 and you'd like to support this channel. All right, let's jump right into the testing of the Tank3 microphone here, and while we do that, I'll be covering the features and specs. There is no post-processing applied to the audio here except for normalizing the level to my usual -16 LUFS and applying a limiter to prevent clipping. First, let's test out the USB and XLR outputs on the Tank3 to see if there's a difference in the sound or the tonal qualities of the mic between those outputs. Good news here, you can use both the XLR and the USB outputs at the same time. I'm recording the USB output straight into my MacBook, and I also have the XLR output running into the Fifine SC1 audio interface, which is also recording into my MacBook. I'm using Audio Hijack to record them both at the same time, and I'll be switching back and forth between them so you can hear if there is a difference. Let me know down in the comments if you do hear a difference between the two outputs. Now, the Tank3 here offers a metal body and a metal mesh grill. It comes with a USB cable, but no desk stand, so you will need to mount it to an arm or stand of your own. It's also a USB-C to USB-A cable, and there's no adapter, so if you have a device like a MacBook, you need to either use a different cable that's C to C or use an adapter for A to C. The physical controls on the mic include a mute button that is rubberized on the top here, but that only works if the USB connection is connected, and it only applies to the USB connection. I will test that between the muted sound and the unmuted sound one more time. And then here's the unmuted sound. And let's just confirm that the XLR output is still working with it muted, so I will mute the USB connection, and this is the sound of the XLR connection with the USB connection muted, and now the USB connection is unmuted, and they work again. So the mute button only mutes the USB output. It does not mute the XLR output if you're using both at the same time. There are two additional buttons here, one for the microphone gain and one for the headphone volume. And again, these are only for the USB connection. They don't do anything, and the headphone output does not work over the XLR connection if that's the only thing you have connected. Here's a quick shot of the spec sheet that comes with the Tank3. One thing I'll point out is that the sensitivity here is good for a dynamic microphone at -50 dBV, which means you don't need a super high gain preamp to drive it. As I mentioned, the preamp in the SC1 interface here from Fifine supplies about 50 dB of gain. It's not having trouble with that. I did have to turn it up to about 90%, but it's not having any trouble providing enough gain. The USB output conversion is 16-bit at 48 kilohertz, but of course, you can also record with the Tank3 in 24-bit or even 32-bit by using the XLR output with an interface or recorder. Now let's test the plosive performance of the Tank3. Please pick my podcast. Please pick my podcast. And now let's test how the Tank3 handles bumps of the desk and the boom arm. This is mounted on a Rode PSA-1 Plus, which is mounted to this table. So here's the desk bumps, and then here's the boom arm bumps. And then I'm also just going to bump the microphone itself. And here's a sample of keyboard sounds with the Tank3 positioned 9 inches away from the keyboard. These are fairly noisy tactile switches on an EpoMaker TH80 Pro keyboard. So this is a little bit noisier than an average keyboard with linear switches, but here's how much of that it's picking up. And now let's compare the Tank3 to a few other microphones that offer both USB and XLR connectivity. We're going to do this as a blind test first, and then I'll reveal what the different microphones were. Let me know which mic was your favorite down in the comments, and don't listen to the answers until you comment which one was your favorite. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Two roads diverged in a wood, And I took the one less traveled by. And that has made all the difference. Okay, so did you pick your favorite? Here are the microphones. Microphone A was the Fifine AM8. Microphone B was the Rode PodMic USB. Microphone C was the Fifine Tank3. Microphone D was the Shure MV7. Microphone E was the Fifine K669D. And microphone F was the Audio-Technica ATR 2100X. All right, I threw a curveball in there. The Fifine K669D does not have USB connectivity, but I wanted to provide a comparison of the sound profile of that mic to the Tank 3 here because it's sort of like the super budget version of a dynamic microphone with a metal build from Fifine, so I just wanted you to be able to compare those. But all the other mics in the comparison have both USB and XLR outputs, and all of those samples were recorded using the USB output except for the K669D. So the Tank 3 is in an interesting position at the $90 price point. The ATR 2100X has a list price of $79, so it's just a tad more affordable. Now the 2100X is a very different style. It's made in the style of a handheld mic. I also think the build quality is not quite as nice as the Tank 3. The Fifine AM8 is actually lower priced than the Tank 3 and has basically the same functionality with USB and XLR outputs, and neither one has software DSP that you can apply to it. The main difference, other than the sound, is that the AM8 has RGB lighting, but it also doesn't have a metal build. The body of the AM8 is all plastic, so I think the Tank 3's higher price point is justified there because it's just a nicer build. The Rode PodMic USB and Shure MV7 are the two higher priced options here at $199 and $249 respectively, and they both have some features that the Tank 3 does not. They have built-in DSP that you can control on your computer or with a mobile app to adjust EQ, compression, and high-pass filter, and those settings are retained in the microphone. So let me know which of those you thought sounded the best in the comments. Are they all worth their respective prices, or do you think the more budget-friendly options here provide better value? All right, now let's talk about my observations here and some pros and cons for the Tank 3. First up, the build quality is nice on the Tank 3. It's a higher price than the AM8, as I mentioned, but it also has a nicer build quality. And same thing goes for the K688 or K668. That's another all-plastic option from Fifine. I think the build quality is definitely nicer. The headphone output has both a pro and a con here, but while we're talking about pros, let me mention the headphone output is very clean. It's a very low-noise headphone output, and that's something that I can't say about any of the other mics from our comparison. They all have a little bit of that white noise, that hiss in the headphone output. We'll get back to the con for the headphone output in just a moment. Also, I always like it when a USB XLR mic lets you use both outputs at the same time, so that is a pro. There's a couple different uses for this, but the most basic would just be to have a redundant recording where you set to a slightly lower level just to make sure you always have good clean audio with no clipping. Essentially, one of the outputs can be your safety track. Another pro is that the frequency response here is not overly boosted in any one area. It's not as bassy as the AM8, and it's not as crispy or harsh in the high frequencies as the K669D. It is a little bit mid-forward, I think, at least that's what I hear with my voice, so I wouldn't really call it neutral, but it's not overbearing in any one area. I also always like to have physical controls for microphone gain, especially on a USB mic, because it makes it easier to use with a variety of devices. The Plosive performance also is pretty good with the Tank 3. I think it's a lot better than the K669D. Now, this isn't completely immune to plosives, but just talking slightly past it at an angle, I find you don't need any external windscreen or pop filter. And lastly, I'll mention that, in my opinion, Fifine did a nice job with both the off-axis performance and the shock rejection. Hold on a second, we need to pause here, because I was about to say that the Tank 3 has an above-average performance when it comes to taps on your boom arm or bumps. But I've discovered that not only was I wrong, but there's two things that I really should be pointing out here. One is that the performance on handling bumps is variable depending on how you have it mounted, and that might be something that you already know. And also, I realized that the bumps were actually coming through in the test, which you heard in the video, louder than what I thought when I was monitoring that in real time. And the main reason for this has to do with the headphone output. I was monitoring using the headphone output on the Tank 3, and that's actually a fairly quiet headphone output. You'll hear me mention this in the cons in just a second. The bumps didn't sound very loud to me while I was monitoring and doing all my testing, so that was my mistake for not recording it and listening back. So the pro that I was going to mention about it being better than average for the price at rejecting bumps, unfortunately, turned out not to be true. This is what tapping the boom arm sounds like on a low-profile metal boom arm. And now this is what it sounds like on a traditional suspension type mount, which is the Rode PSA 1 Plus. So hopefully that comes through on the recording and it's not just me in the monitoring this time, but I hear quite a bit more of that resonant boomy sound with the bumps on this style of boom arm compared to the low profile arm. All right, now a couple of cons for the Tank 3. First, this one might not be super fair because it's just kind of a thing with USB mics, especially dynamic USB mics, but there's a fair amount of self-noise over the USB connection. Now that white noise or that hiss that you hear over the XLR connection depends on the preamp in your interface or recorder that you're using. But over USB, it's based on the hardware in the mic itself. The Tank 3, to my ear, has more of that self-noise than both the PodMic USB and the MV7. Those are significantly more expensive though, so you would expect the internal preamp to be a bit better. Where it becomes really noticeable is in a recording where you're normalizing up to a higher loudness level like you do for a podcast. In those situations, it becomes pretty noticeable and you want to use some noise reduction. But a decent noise reduction plugin will clean that up easily. Here's the same sample from earlier with noise reduction and a little bit of post-processing applied. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So you can still get a good sounding result here when you're recording and you can post-process. It's just less of an issue with the more expensive USB mics that have a little bit higher quality internal preamps and conversion. Of course, if you're using the XLR output with a decent interface or recorder, this is a non-issue. Now let's go back to the headphone output. While it is a nice clean output, it's a little bit quiet. I tested it with a couple pairs of headphones that are not high impedance, and I had to turn up the volume pretty much all the way just to get decent monitoring levels. So while the very low noise output is great, it would be nice if it were a little bit louder. And this is also kind of a small con here, but the mute button has an audible sound when you toggle it on and off, so it would be nice if the button didn't make a sound. All right, so with the pros and cons in mind, I think that the Tank 3 is a nice option for the price. Just a couple years ago, there were very few options on the market at a reasonable price that offered both USB and XLR outputs. Now there are a lot more options, and the tried and true ones are also still there. But I think the Tank 3 offers a nice combination of build quality that's better than several competitors at that same price, as well as usable features. Now, if Fifine made this mic with a higher quality internal preamp and 24-bit conversion for the USB output, but they could still price it in the range of maybe $100 to $130, that would be a really great option in my opinion. But the current performance is still quite good for a price of $89. So let me know what you think of the Tank 3 down in the comments. Let me know if you picked one up for yourself and how you're liking it. Don't forget to subscribe to the Semi-Pro Tech+Gear channel, and hey, while you're here, why don't you check out this video? I'm sure you'll like it. Thanks everybody. See you next time.